Everyone to the Winds, Water, and Wildfires Summit for the Northeast. Woo, woo. I'm super excited to be here. We've got a great lineup of speakers, and it really shows the planning group did a fabulous job with pulling together representation from all the different states, and you can see that by what's, the folks that are on here today. So thank you to them for really reaching out and working on that. Couple of housekeeping things. My name is Ann Walker. I am the Wildfire Program Coordinator for the NACD, and I'm super happy to be the facilitator today and to work with every one of you. And please put any questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring those. And as well as Mary Scott with NACD, and Mike Beacom is behind the scenes running the Zoom, making sure we're all on mute, which I'll go into some housekeeping things. Please keep your microphones on mute unless you're speaking, and also be cognizant of what's happening in the camera. And with that, there's a couple other things I wanted to cover. The first thing, so folks understand this is being recorded. These recordings will be available on the NACD YouTube channel afterwards. And so you can go back with the sessions on like Cohesive Strategy 101 today and tomorrow for this 2-day meeting. Those will be merged. You can see what, how the cohesive strategy really plays into everything that we do. And that's really the objective for today's meeting, is to understand what, conservation districts are already doing with implementing the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy and understanding what it is. I think it'll be very helpful to the districts in the future. I think being involved in the 3 goal areas of restoring and maintaining resilient landscapes is something that's near and dear to your heart, with your focus on water in the Northeast 20 states, and also with fire adapted communities or prepared communities. And the last one is safe and effective wildfire response. Firefighters do a lot more things than just fighting fires. They're, your first responders and medics and such. And they all get thrown into the mix when there's some type of event, whether it's a wind event, high wind event, ice storm, wildfire, or flooding. I learned a lot with the planning group and how many tornadoes were in Minnesota last year, a lot. And so I think it really is timely that conservation districts come to the table and understand what a lot of the other agencies have been implementing for several years, and that is this cohesive strategy with multiple areas that come together based on science. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. And with that, I think I covered everything as far as with the housekeeping. Mike, did I miss anything?
No, you're good.
Okay. All righty. With that, I see that Chris is on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kim, I want to turn it over to you first for our leadership welcome.
Thank you, Ann, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to, on behalf of NACD, to welcome you all to the Winds, Water, and Wildfire Summit for the Northeast, and welcome Minnesota to the Northeast. We will gladly adopt you as our one of our own. The topic is interesting and challenging, all at the same time, and how we in our region manage resources is different than how resources are managed out west. What hits the news in the Northeast tends to be more weather-related storm events. Winter storms do lots of damage, out here, but how all of these topics intertwine comes down to the wise use, wise management of our resources. We're seeing more and more storm-related damage, lots of tree damage, which pulls down power lines and such. Is that a function of poor management? Because our concept of conservation is leave it alone. Or is it a function of our forests are in the successional stage and they are transitioning to that next life stage and they're reaching their natural end of their lifespan, and we need to take a more active role in managing them for both people who utilize the resources and those that live among our community that are affected by our conservation decisions. So this is an excellent time to come together and talk about how wind, water, and wildfire are all interrelated and interconnected, and what we as conservation districts and decision makers can do to help influence that into the future. So with that, again, welcome on behalf of NACD. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Anne, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Kim. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and understanding the different districts within the National Association of Conservation Districts. It's different for a lot of the different agencies as well. And so when I've been referring to the Northeast, I refer to it as what we have divided the country up when implementing the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. So the cohesive strategy regions are the Northeast 20 states, which aligns with the National Association of State Foresters. And that's been a key piece to structure within implementation of the strategy on the land. Thank you so much, Kim. Now I will go ahead and turn it over to Chris French. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris.
Finding my mute button.
Understand.
So hold on one second. Anne, thank you for inviting me into the conference this morning. And I want to reiterate what Kim said, that this is a really important time, I think, for conservation districts, for local, state, and federal government entities to really focus on how we work together. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris French. I am the current acting deputy undersecretary in natural resource and the environment at USDA. So that area oversees the Forest Service for the USDA. And my normal job is actually at the Forest Service as the deputy chief that oversees our national forest system. I also am a landowner that works with, we have some property up in New York, along with some other partners and landowners of our preserve that we have. And we have active work that we do with the state and the county and conservation districts, as well as with participating in some long-term conservation efforts with NGOs and the state governments. I say that because, you know, Anne has been talking about the National Cohesive Strategy on wildfire. And what I want to reiterate in the position of the administration right now is that we're at a critical moment. We're at a critical moment in this country of dealing with the effects of climate and how it's affecting weather events, whether it's extended drought in places, whether it is weather events that are hitting us either more frequently or at intensities that we haven't seen in the past. It is extending both the range of our national fire responses and season and the intensity of them. And so, you know, there's a lot of focus on what has been occurring with wildfires in the West. But the reality is that as we look at this increasingly larger fire season year after year in the past 15 years, we're also starting to see the effects that are occurring in the Northeast and in the South. You know, large scale fires that are happening earlier and at larger intensities in places like New Jersey, in places such as the Lake States. We're seeing fires break out in the South in timeframes weeks before we typically would expect them, and certainly at scopes that are a lot larger than we expected, and with devastating effects in places. We've all seen the effects of hurricanes, of flooding events, of extended winter period events, and what we recognize at USDA and as part of the administration and as part of the broader set of policies that we've been putting out is that these sorts of events, whether you're looking at wildfire or whether you're looking at weather events, they don't adhere to geopolitical boundaries. They don't just occur on state lands or in federal lands. They occur everywhere. They affect private lands. They affect all jurisdictions. And yet our ability to make those lands and the communities that are a part of them more resilient in order to withstand the sorts of shifts and changes we're seeing, whether it's from wildfire or whether it's from some potential flooding event, is increasingly taking better cooperation, better communication, better planning among state, local, federal, and private interests. This is where conservation districts, I think, are critical. And the work that you do and that we've seen across the country is one that I often am sharing in my job about great examples of cross-boundary, cross-benefiting work where we build trust with landowners, where we build trust in communities, where we're together taking on many of these issues and coming up with common sense solutions of how to address them. We're very focused right now of bringing resources to bear so that there are more resources available to conservation districts, to state and local governments to deal with building community resilience. What I'd ask you to think about as well, and what I talk with my own leaders and employees about is how do we create a space as leaders in our communities, as responsible stewards for lands, how do we create open spaces where we're bringing more people to the table to talk about these issues? How are we bringing in more folks that have not participated in the past to sit down well before one of these disasters hit? And we're actually working together to figure out how best to respond when something like this occurs. You know, just recently we were out talking, and I recognize this is in Colorado, but there are examples in many other places, including the East, where we were looking at the cost that it actually took us to suppress a fire that was outside of Fort Collins, one of our largest fires last year, and the cost it's taking to recover that area versus the cost if we had simply gone in and done pre-work and treated that so that when a fire did move through there, those landscapes came out the other end, essentially not needing our restoration work because the upfront restoration work allowed that to be resilient. It's the same thing with our communities. The price to do the work upfront is so much cheaper than the responses we do in the moment to pour every resource we had to try to protect things or respond after a disaster when we've seen a flood or when we've seen some sort of large wind event that has affected an entire community. And so taking on these sorts of planning issues beforehand, working together, coming up with realistic solutions, that's my challenge to you. That's my challenge, is how do you bring more people into the space that you're in right now? And my other challenge, I'd say, is tell us what we need to do as state, local, and federal entities to make your job more effective. Because this partnership, I think, is critical as we go forward. I'm really excited for the discussions you're going to have during this event. I feel like the space we're in right now in this moment to talk about these issues is critical. And so good luck. I appreciate the opportunity, Ann, to come in and just say a few words. And a deep thank you for all the work that you lead through each of your conservation districts. And good luck with the rest of the event. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate your words of wisdom there. And I have some friends in Colorado that have told me about the visit out there. And for the state to have the 3 largest wildfires in its history, all in the same state, is devastating. And a lot of it was on federal ground. You know, up in the Northeast, they have a lot of fires, but not necessarily as many acres. But, you know, I do think the management, like you're talking about in your place in New York, there's a focus on water protection, which I see at such a higher level in the Northeast than what I have in the other, during the other summits and in my own travels in the South and the West. And I really think there's a lot to learn from what we hear over the next 2 days, you know, from these conservation districts and folks up in the Northeast 20 that I think that really will lend itself to help with education into the other regions. Are you able to stick around for a little bit for a little Q&A after introductions today?
You bet. I can stick around for about another 15 minutes or so.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. I know I have a couple questions. If there's folks on here that have any questions for Chris, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Moving on down to our Minnesota welcome. So like I said early on, we were going to have these in person in Minnesota. We are on Zoom today, as y'all know. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kurt and Leanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. First of all, welcome to Minnesota. Welcome to virtual Minnesota. I don't know that we can find you a lobster roll anywhere in Minnesota, but we can sure get you a walleye sandwich or walleye fingers at about any restaurant you want to walk into. Minnesota is a diverse state. We have all the way from northeast, north central Minnesota with the largely forested area, the northwest, the largely plains area. Central Minnesota runs through urban and ag areas, and then the southern Minnesota is largely ag. And each one of those areas carries its own importance as far as wildfires, importance as far as resource conservation. So we are happy to host this, and we thank NACD for choosing us to host this, and we feel that you'll gain a lot of insights and inspiration in the next couple days. Also, thank you to each one of the presenters. Everybody has worked so diligently hard on this and showed up for meetings and you know, put up with some of my humorous comments that I made along the way. So thank you for all that. And there's been a lot of tireless putting all this together, and thank you, Ann, for facilitating this meeting. And one other thing I'd like to stress is we've made an effort here to reach out to, I think, what is some non-traditional partners that saltwater districts may be able to tap into as far as partners that we haven't reached out to before. So I think this diversity in what we do is important, and I think exploring new partnerships and exploring ways that we can enhance our conservation effort, I think, is a very important issue. And I think, you know, right now I better just quit ministering here, and I'll introduce Leanne Buck, our rock star executive director from Minnesota. So.
Thank you, Kurt. My name is Leanne Buck, and I serve as Executive Director for our Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts here in Minnesota. We represent 88 soil and water districts, and I would say there are 440 dedicated elected board members and over 450 resource professionals at the local office level. And so to start out, I know many of you in this webinar are from different parts of the country. Many of us are from Minnesota too. But I'd like you to do me a favor and start this off with, if you could go to your chat button and just type in what state you, where you live. I think that'll just give all of us on the audience a sense of where we're coming from. So while you're doing that, I also wanted to say for today's session, I was thinking of two quotes that seemed relevant. And for my first quote, I'm gonna have to, it's attributed to a Wisconsin professor. So my apologies to Wisconsin, but it bears repeating. The function of a conservation district is to take the available technical, financial, and educational resources, whatever their source, and focus or coordinate them so they meet the needs of the local land users for conservation of soil, water, and related resources. So whenever I hear about a national cohesive strategy, I'm going to think, well, what does that mean for me as a local level? So then the other quote that was relevant to me was, all politics are local. And again, the two quotes that I was thinking about, what for me, it talks about local, local, local. And ultimately, whether it's your constituents, your neighbors, the voters, when we're talking about public policy, they're going to be concerned about the issues that affect their personal lives, their homes, or their communities. So when we talk about wildfires, for example, in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, we probably usually think of somebody out in California, the news reporter, talking about this large fire that's, you know, burning out of control. For us, we do have wildfires. We know there's issues, as was just previously mentioned, with some of our climate resilient. But maybe for us, the terminology and the language is more about soil health. How do we promote healthy forests so we don't have these fires or out of control issues, or being able to adapt to some of our resilient issues with climate change? So what I want to say to everybody on this, because we're coming from different perspectives, I just want to reiterate that the districts have an infrastructure that promotes communities. And this is also one of the reasons why soil and water districts have the citizen board members. So as an association, I know in Minnesota, our board of directors, we continue to look at how districts can make the landscape resilient. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion on wildfires and forestry health, and how we collectively accelerate not only the cohesive strategies, but actually the actions needed for local ownership and implementation of those strategies. So thank you to Mike and Ann and the rest of the crew at the National Association of Conservation Districts for this forum to learn from each other. So I'll give it back to Ann, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you, Kurt. Now we'll move down into NACD's Forestry Resource Policy Group representatives, Linda Bronson, Tom Crow.
Okay, thank you, Ann, and welcome everyone to the Winds, Water, and Wildfire Summit. I'm very pleased to be here, part of it. I am a Northeast representative for the National Association of Conservation Districts, and I'm also the Northeast member for the Forestry Resource Policy Group. And our group, we advise the NACD leadership and on forest issues relevant to all of our conservation districts, as well as our partners. And we keep all of our district membership current and informed about forest policy and management via our publication, which is called Forestry Notes. Perhaps some of you are familiar with that already. If you're not, you can subscribe to it through the NACD website. We produce this in a partnership with USDA Forest Service and the National Association of State Foresters. On a more personal level, I am a supervisor on our Grafton County Conservation District Board and past president of our state association and also our state agency. I live in a little town called Wentworth in north central New Hampshire, in the foothills of the western foothills of the White Mountains, where I manage about 200 acres of northern hardwoods and mixed conifers, primarily for wildlife habitat. Though we haven't had any wildfires in our particular area recently, we do have them in New Hampshire. However, we have lots of wind and water issues for sure. And I think this seminar could not be more appropriate for our times. And I look forward to what we can learn together on these issues. And thank you for participating.
Linda.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Yeah, my name's Tom Crow. I'm also with the NACD Forest Policy Group and also serve on the National Joint Forestry team as part of NACD. I've been a private consulting forester for 35 years and working mostly with small landowners, about 200 landowners a year, mostly with 20 acres or less. So I'm in a very fragmented area of forest land. It's more ag. Don't have much issue with fires, especially with the fragmentation, but we do have a lot of issues with water and wind. I got involved with soil and water districts about 25 years ago because they were boots on the ground, they were local, they were trusted, they were part of the community, and because of the outreach and education that they were doing and have continued to do since that time. As Chris French kind of said, with the fires, we need to be a little bit more proactive than reactive. A lot of times being proactive is a lot more cost effective. And causes a lot less issues. Over the years, one of the key things I've realized is the key to healthy forests is having forest management. And along with that forest management, we need forest markets. If we don't have forest markets, it makes it very difficult to do the forest management. And then through access to those markets and forest management, we get the benefits of healthy ecosystems and healthy communities and water quality, air quality, wildlife habitat, and everything else. And then, as Chris said, having that proactive management reduces the risk and the extent of the damage of fire, wind, flooding, climate change. So that's kind of where I've been involved. Going back to SWCDs, they're boots on the ground, they're local, they're a way to pull in the community and educate the locals. So welcome everybody to the conference, and should be a good couple days.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Linda. When you talk about local, and Leanne, you really mentioned it, you know, it's a national strategy and that's what we call it. And we have fire in the name, but it means a lot more than that when you look at the specific goal areas. And so next up, we have Minnesota Dakota County Commissioner, who, when we were co-authors or writing the National Cohesive Strategy, she was Mayor Mary from Apple Valley, Minnesota, who represented National League of Cities. And so Mike is going to go ahead and play a pre-recorded message. Unfortunately, Mary was not able to join us today, but if folks could go ahead and turn your cameras off, I think, will that help, Mike, with playing the video? Okay. We're not able to hear it, Mike.
And fire cohesive strategy. I'm a collaborative person by nature, and the environment is a priority to me. So naturally, when I was appointed by the National League of Cities to serve in the National Wildland Fire Committee, I said yes, it made sense to me. I got it just like many of you will. And when we began this process back in 2009, there were not as many wildfires in our country. Clearly, that has changed dramatically. Building relationships and creating a cohesive strategy with all levels of government and community before a catastrophic fire happens will propel you to a more successful outcome. A cohesive strategy for wildland fire has three elements. The first is the maintenance of a resilient landscape. This prevents catastrophic fires. Second, the creation of a fire-adaptive community designed and planned to manage and suppress fire when it shows up. And then the final element is the development of an interagency response to wildland fire, creating a coordination of effort. This is essential. You're going to have chaos in the first stage of a disaster, but with a well-prepared plan of attack, you can lean into your strategic plan to make you stronger and ultimately create an outcome that is more desirable, preserving more lives and property. You'll know that someone has your back when things get wild. So today, cities and counties, what action will you take to be prepared for the next emergency that will show up? Have a great conference, and thank you for serving our region.
All right. Thank you so much,